And all my enemies defeated. In your name, your name. 'Cause my God is faithful. He is. My God is faithful. He is. My God is.
Welcome back to Budget Worship. My name is Rob. So good to see y'all again. With me is Jameson. He's probably one of the most gifted musicians that I know. We've been friends for a while, and we've been talking about possibly doing some work together here for Budget Worship. Why don't you take a minute, Jameson, just introduce yourself. How did you come to this point?
Well, to wrap it up real quick, my dad was a pastor, his dad, my mom's dad, so I come from a long line of ministry, in a ministry family. But when I was super young, I got put on the drums in church, and by the time I was 10, I was playing the piano and the bass, started the guitar, and ended up getting to go to college and play drum set for some traveling choirs, and get into the recording business, and then the traveling touring business for many years in Nashville. And then about 15 years ago decided to focus more on worship ministry and teaching, and so that's pretty much what I've been doing up until now, is worship pastor and teaching private instructions.
All right, so one of the things that we really want to tackle in this episode, and there's a lot of different reasons that we would have to get into this, and that's acoustic sets. We can't always have, the things that we've shown in the past has mainly been things where you have just incredible amounts of instruments, or you have backing tracks and all of this fun stuff, and it's all really fun stuff to play with, and it all really does a good job of helping people open their hearts up for worship. But a lot of times with a lot of churches, they're really small, they don't have the musical talent to pull from, so that leaves us with what we have right here. We have an acoustic guitar, a gifted singer, and a okay cajon player. So really, what are the biggest pros of having a setup like this that you can think of, Jameson?
Well, first of all, it's personnel. I think that's probably, as a worship leader, the times that I use acoustic sets is when it's a holiday, it's a special time, or I just have people out, like during the summer. Lots of people take off during the summer for family vacations, and so sometimes it's just easier to break it down instead of trying to bring in guest musicians, or a lot of times you can't find a guest musician, especially in the summer.
Right.
And then, of course, the things that you would plan that would be special, like an in-the-round acoustic service, or when you take it outside, like we're tonight. It's like, hey, we want to go outside. Well, we don't want to set the whole band up outside. We can't set the whole band up outside. So the acoustic is, you can play the same songs and worship the same God, but it definitely has a different feel.
Oh, absolutely, and it has a more almost like a campfire feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got a fire right here.
We were thinking about setting that up, but that might have been a little bit much to try and pull off. But having that campfire atmosphere, it also gives it an intimate quality, and that's something that a lot of people really overlook when they think about, oh, well, let's just break it down and have an acoustic set. That intimacy between you, the people that you're worshiping with, and that also brings the intimacy of the Holy Spirit in there, and that's an important thing that you really can't overlook.
That's right. It's kind of outside of just acoustic, but something I would do at least twice a year, in my services, is get off of the stage. Sit down in the floor, get in the middle. If you're in a situation where you can't move chairs, you can sit down, just one step lower, or just change the way people are looking, the direction they're looking, because sometimes that's all it takes for someone to get out of a rut.
And talking about ruts for a minute, there's a lot of times that people will come into the same service and they'll expect the same songs to be done the same way, and if you don't tell anybody that there's going to be a change and you just break down and have an acoustic set, nobody knows about it, well, that's going to get people's attention, and that's going to put their attention off of the worship leader and off of the worship band and put the attention on Jesus where it's supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And that's a very, very important thing that you just touched on right there, Jameson, having that kind of almost like a reset.
Right. Well, the complacency is one of the worst things you could have in a church, not just in music ministry, but in any of your ministries, is people doing the same thing every day the same way. Because replicate success, but it's what you're talking about. People sit on the same pew and they hear the songs, and when it's different, sometimes they're angry that it's different, but sometimes someone might have been dealing with something. They had too much pride to stand up and admit it. But an intimate service where the Spirit could come in will just break that shell right off and open it right up. It's beautiful. I've seen it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it happen.
And that's something. Not getting into the same routine. There's too many people that just have that same routine, and I'm a creature of habit naturally. So I have my way of doing things, and I tend to do things the same way every time. But having that different experience. And then let's talk about some of the other things that like outdoor worship services. Right now we're in an outside environment. I mean, we're dealing with traffic noise right now, but you know what? That's really just part of it. We're out here enjoying this beautiful evening. I mean, it's just crisp, clear night. It's absolutely gorgeous. And even just playing our little intro right there, I got the Spirit tugging at my heart, and I really enjoyed that. And I've played drums for years, but I've never really been much of a cajon player. But just the opportunity.
Just kidding.
But the opportunity to just do something different, I mean, that gives me like this different perspective while we're worshiping together, and it really just kind of touched on my heart, even just for that few minutes. And that's something that we'd really like to, as much as possible, bring to the congregation, is that intimate feeling.
That's right. Well, here's some really good tips I could give people, not just a musician or the planner, but just someone in the church, because I have been in the situation where they said, hey, we're going to do a Christmas Eve service. It's going to be at ABC Park on 123 Street at 7 p.m. Christmas Eve. And I'm like, did anyone scout the location? Is there electricity? Is there lights? Are we covered if it rains or snows? That seems like, well, why would you think of that? Well, why would you not think of that? If you're going to have a high school graduation at 7 p.m. on the football field, I bet you look at the weather forecast before you go out there. So it's it works the same way with planning something outdoors. If it's like a sunrise service for Easter, is something I've done outside for the past few years, and we've had to set up picnic tents and put them over our heads because it was misting, raining. We've had to run 300 or 400 feet of extension cable so we could hook up a portable speaker, unlike the one we have here that can run off the battery. Those things you have to think about besides just planning the song is logistics. What's it going to look like? Where are people going to stand, sit? And what we're here to talk about is what's it going to sound like and how we're going to estimate or figure out what we're going to do so we can pull this off without the singers blowing their vocal cords out by the second chorus.
And these little battery-powered PA systems, I mean, they're absolutely a blessing. They're portable. They're quick to set up. Matt, if you would just put the camera on that for just a second. Matt's still here with us, but Matt gets to do his favorite kind of work behind the camera tonight. This is their youth group PA system. It's portable. All it is, we've got an acoustic, we've got a singer, we've got a cajon, and we've got one microphone, and it all comes into this PA system that's battery powered.
So basically, these have come a long way. These have what you would have in a mixing board in a larger setup, but they are, like they said, battery powered. They'll last hours depending on which models you get. This is a Samsung specifically. I believe it's about $400 new. There are bigger versions. They can be paired. But you can see anyone who's familiar with a simple sound system, you have a mic input, a guitar input, Bluetooth, iPhone, USB, so your basic stuff. So to his point, what if you get outside and there's no electricity? Well, guess what? I got a battery powered speaker and a simple little microphone set up, and that's all it takes, because you might have 20 people, but outdoors when there's noise and there's distance, you still need a microphone in some cases. So that's a nice little budget option to pull off this kind of a setup.
Right, and I've got one of these speakers, an older model, and I've used it. I've had to even replace the battery. I just replaced the battery last year, and it was about $20 for a replacement battery, the rechargeable battery. But the thing is with, sometimes you would say, well, you don't need a microphone. I've heard that a lot. You don't need a microphone. But some people can't really if they get past this level that we're speaking right now with their singing voice, it loses its effectiveness because they're so used to being mic'd and more me in the monitor or whatever, and they can't project, and you really do. I was kidding earlier, but you really can damage your voice, and you're definitely not going to make that last song.
Yeah, whenever I'm on vocals, I have to sing quieter because the louder I get, the faster I blow out my voice, or I actually start to lose part of my range. With too much volume, and that's something that as a music teacher and a vocal coach and all the instruments that you teach that you probably know a lot more about.
Yeah, and you can prepare yourself for that. That's why that's why opera singers and people who do live theater, they don't use microphones, but they do lots of warm-ups and practicing for lots of times years to be able to project at that level and still have all the control that you would want to sing a pretty song. Sometimes soft and quiet and slow, it's hard to pull off when you're having to really push your volume out over a crowd of people.
And vocal dynamics is a thing that's really, really tricky until you've spent years and years and years honing that. It's not something that you get overnight or that you're just born with. It actually takes work, and it takes a lot of, like James was saying, it takes a lot of preparation.
Well, you want to talk about some different maybe instrument setups for acoustic worship?
Sure, absolutely.
So I've done everything from the full band, which usually ends up with your drummer sitting on a cajon or playing a lap percussion set. I like to make the singers work a little bit, with a shaker, even if it's just an egg shaker.
No tambourines.
We have a very strict rule. If a tambourine,
no tambourine and no banjo.
If a tambourine is not attached to the drum set with actual physical hardware, it is to be burned. There are no rogue tambourines.
We could do a later episode on one time at the church where I hit a tambourine, and the lead pastor had to beg me to tell him where I'd hit it.
Did you tell him?
I had to. Yeah. I was coerced.
Chicken.
Yeah. So, hey, but you know what I did? This could be another episode. I put that lady in my band. I gave her a job, and she couldn't play the tambourine anymore because she was busy doing something else.
Just to be clear, you said band, not band.
Yes.
But there's a lot of different things. I mean, you've got acoustic basses that actually project fairly well. I mean, they're rather large and cumbersome, but there are other options. We got other options for drums other than a cajon. There's a suitcase drum set. I've seen some of those that do a really, really good job.
The little cocktail kit.
The cocktail kits are great. You got your singers, obviously, they have their microphones, acoustic guitars. I mean, there's really your almost endless limitation if you take technology back a little bit and go back to some of the things that you don't really see as much anymore in music because everything's electrified now.
Right. Though probably the one instrument that loses the most whatever going outdoors would be your keyboard piano player, because there's you pretty much still have to use your electric instrument.
But here again, a keyboard plugged into this, you could have something. They have little MIDI controllers and an iPad now that could vary. So there are some budget options for that.
And with me, when I say an acoustic set, doesn't have to be completely stripped down, because when you're talking about acoustic basses, I've done many acoustic sets with just a normal bass and even the full drum kit. We just took maybe the electric guitars out of it, or any kind of overdrive or padding, any of the kind of the electronic sounds we took out of it. But doing worship just by yourself, you can go from one person all the way up to using your full band if you've got the time and the setup and the availability of your volunteers to do something like that.
And something else that we're all familiar with when it comes to acoustic worship sets is what happened during COVID. During COVID, my church went to having drive-in services where we just had a PA system, and we had our singers, we had acoustic guitar, we had an electronic drum set that we brought outside and fed that into the PA system, and then we had a little transmitter that it was transmitting on a radio station, so everybody would sit in their cars. If it was too cold, they'd roll up their windows and turn on their radios, and when the preacher get fired up and everybody wants to say amen, they honk their horns. And it was just this amazing experience. But being a part of that worship team and looking over a sea of metallic colored cars with glares reflecting on the windshields, and all you hear is the horns. I mean, it's kind of alien, and it's kind of a lonely feeling, but it also gives you that kind of inner quiet. And it was an amazing experience. I'm really glad that we did it. And my church had started doing that on summer evenings. When it'd get cool, we would do a drive-in service. And then when COVID hit, we were already set up for that. So that was one thing that really helped a lot in dealing with COVID, was the flexibility to transition into a worship service like what we've got here this evening.
Right. Well, speaking of COVID, before we went outside, we were just acoustic. Matter of fact, it was just me for a couple of weeks, and then we had a singer, and then by maybe the 5th or 6th week, we had a couple of singers, and I was able to rotate a couple more people. But not until we went outside for a few weeks did we include a bigger setup. So it kind of works into everything we're talking about. We went a stripped down acoustic, which took, I had about a 200 song repertoire in our planning center to choose from, and it immediately cut that down by probably 60% to something that we could do immediately without having rehearsals, because we couldn't rehearse either, not in person. But we talked about earlier, we were talking about setups and all, but what we decided to do, because we had a plan of, we were going to do this every week for 6 weeks. We did ours at 8:30 in the morning because we still did our live stream at 10. We didn't want to try to live stream the outdoor service because we didn't know how to do it, honestly. And what we were able to do was use it was actually my school's PA, and I just had to train a team of volunteers and give them all a simple task, and make labels for everything and zip tie cables together, so they just had 1 wad of cables to take over to a snake. But you kind of have to adapt and adjust. Luckily, the music part of it and the worship part of it wasn't something we had to adjust to, which I think is what kept it all together for all the churches during that time, was the heart of let's keep having church. And
that's really the important thing, is no matter what's going on, we've got to keep having church. We are commanded to gather together to sharpen each other. As iron sharpens iron, we're supposed to be very social with our fellow believers, and that's scriptural, that's biblical, and that's very important. We're not supposed to be off on our own, and that was the thing that was so hard with so many people when COVID hit, was they were having a hard time because they were in isolation. I was very lucky that I never really had to be in isolation, so I didn't have to deal with all that. I had a job where I didn't miss a day of work because of it. But there's so many people that were hurting because they were isolated away from their fellow believers, and it was really, live streaming became a way for them to at least get fed. And when it's stripped down acoustic sets, it's simpler, it's easier to live stream, it's more portable, it can be taken anywhere. There's no reason to not have church and have worship.
Right, and you can take your acoustic set to the local nursing home or the local hospital, or wherever you need to take your team, not just have to be on the grounds of your the place where you worship.
Absolutely, and to your point, there are still places in the world where they can't meet. I mean, they literally, China right now, they cannot have church, so their best bet is to sneak a church service in a home or something like that. So they don't get the luxury of the Behringer X32 boards, the Midas, they don't get the luxury of 5 hours of setup. So something as simple as a little battery-powered PA speaker and a guitar and a cajon, it might be the only way they hear God, hear from God, hear about God. So to our budget worship central theme, just know that an acoustic set is a key part of that, to break it down, change the dynamic, and to be honest, to get the word out when sometimes it just otherwise couldn't.
And there's other things, like let's say we've got a new church plant or a new church startup that meets in a coffee house. How better to have a worship service than a guitar, a cajon, and dedicated hearts that want to worship Jesus?
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's all it takes. The equipment can grow with your team. I'm sure y'all have covered some of this before. If you've been in a situation where you had a 5-member team, and all of a sudden God blesses you with more musicians and singers, and you're like, well, we don't have enough microphones, or we don't have enough inputs, or bigger problems, and it's just kind of ways to grow, but those are good growing pains.
And what better growing pain to have than having too many people with a servant's heart that want to get together and do this? That's the best growing pain you could possibly have.
Yeah, probably the hardest part of being a worship leader or any leadership in the church is volunteers and recruiting and keeping volunteers.
And we actually did a whole episode on that. I think that was our second episode or third episode. It was all about taking care of your volunteers, taking care of your team. And you know what? When it comes down to the acoustic sets, breaking down and having something simpler so that the rest of your team can take a week off and sit in the congregation with their family and just enjoy a church service, worship in and around God's people. I mean, that's also part of taking care of your team, and that's very important to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a part of the Methodist Church for the past 9 years, and always have Christmas Eve services, several of them. And I would always offer my team the night off. I was like, look, no one has to come on Christmas Eve. We'll plan a service that I could do by myself, but you're all invited, you know. And then pick songs accordingly. Songs that would sound great with everyone, or that would be okay with just me.
Yeah, I like that. You do have to give them breaks. Sometimes I've had personal experiences where people ask, hey, why didn't you come to such and such, the event we did? And I'm like, that's truthfully the only time I get off. You know, we're here doing sound, we're here playing, we're doing this every week. It's not that we don't want to hang out, it's just that that's the time that we get to spend. So I definitely like that point.
And here at Budget Worship, I mean, no matter what we're covering, we always have to keep in the back of our minds, we always have to be watchful of burnout, because we don't want anybody getting burned out. So everything that we do, whether it's the tech, whether it's an acoustic set, whether it's our live streaming, it's all, we've got to focus on making sure that nobody from our musicians, our worship leaders, our tech teams, nobody gets burned out. And the only way to do that is to give people breaks.
That's right. And also try to spot it in your leadership, because the thing with leaders, they'll fake it till they make it, because you can't completely burn out, even if you are burnt out. You gotta keep dragging your feet along. So if you pray for your pastors and pray for your church leadership, because more than likely one of them is in some kind of stage of burnout, because it happens, it comes and it goes. But luckily, we've got the great healer who always lets us know exactly what we were supposed to be doing and why we were doing it. It's those winks from God that keeps us right in line with what we're supposed to do.
And always be watchful for those, because those are just some of the most important blessings that you get, are just those little acknowledgments from God to say, hey, you know what, you're on the right path, or hey, you know what, this is the path you need to go down. And that's something that, especially with planning acoustic sets, you get very, very intimate with the Holy Spirit. You're intimate with the people that are worshiping with you. It's an amazing feeling, and it's so powerful.
And we could talk about, if we wanted to go further, we could talk about some miserable outdoor experiences. You deal with the elements, getting wet, getting hot, rained on, but that's just part of it. You're going to play outside, you're going to have to deal with that stuff.
Absolutely. I think that about covers it. What do you think? Play a little bit? Enjoy it.
Like I said, we could talk about it all night, but we could do this song. This song was, I wrote when I was about 20 years old, and it just comes right out of songs. Be ye still and know that I am God. Know that I am here among you. And I'm resting in your praise. Be ye still and know that I am God. And know that I will move your mountains when you bless my holy name.
Thanks for being with us, Jameson.